Hi, I'm Danielle Avitable with Woodrow Wilkins, author of the new book, Delta Blue, and we have an exclusive interview with the author/reporter. So how are you doing this morning, Woody?
Probably should be backward, reporter/author.
Reporter/author. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine, Danielle, and you?
I'm doing good. So your book is about an African-American police officer who falls in love with a white prosecutor from California. And he has to decide whether or not to act on his love or to hold back in fear of what people will say or think about him.
Right. It's kind of a fallout from years of segregation, both forced and voluntary. So it's sort of a cultural climate here in the Delta. The story does take place in it's very similar to Greenville, Washington County, Mississippi. And people, it's different. They're not really ready to see that kind of relationship. And so, look around pro athletes, politicians, entertainers who cross the color line. They get a lot of flack from other people. And so he knows this, and he's nervous about it.
So what made you want to pick this topic? Does it interest you at all? Or?
Well, I guess it does, because growing up, and of course me personally, I never had any issues with it, but I heard so much about it from my parents, from people that I got to know older. I don't want this, I don't want to see that sort of thing. And I always felt like if two grown people, two adults, they're mentally competent, and if they choose to be together and they're not breaking any laws, it really shouldn't be anybody else's business. But people feel like you're obligated to go a certain way. And I always felt like that was wrong. So I knew at some point that I would try to get that out. I just didn't know that it was going to be in this story, because I had a totally different idea of how I was going to do it.
And what was that?
I probably was going to use some teenagers in high school, because you had to deal with peer pressure there. And maybe there's some rivals on the football team or something who would beat up the boyfriend, or pull a prank at a party, and he's got to prove his love by going through all of that to get her. That's where I was probably 25, 30 years ago, but I never wrote that story. I never really, I didn't want that to be my first published story. Mm-hmm. And here we are in 2013, and it is my first published story, but in a different way. This actually started out as a justice story built around a murder trial, which is based on true events, a trial that happened in Washington County in 2005. And just some interesting things go on in the courtroom that gave me an idea, and I wanted to build a story around that. But in trying to figure out how to make it fiction, make it compelling, make it something more than a boring transcript of a trial, I needed a character, so I came up with Ken. He's the police officer here. And it was going to be about him and what he's going through. So, okay, what's his story? He needs a girlfriend. All right, let's enter Cynthia, Lieutenant Cynthia Morgan, in the very first draft of this. She was a co-worker, black female, and they were close friends. But I just couldn't work out any kind of a challenge with that relationship.
You needed a twist.
I needed a twist. So while I was stewing on that, I went ahead and built the rest of my cast. I had to assign characters to everybody who appears in court, all the witnesses who testify. And one thing that I also want to do is have some sense of racial balance with my stories. Now, there may come a time when I have a very small group in a unique situation where I may go all this or all that. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I do want to have sort of a big world, we're all in this together type feel to my core group of characters. So I needed somebody to work with him. And logically, that would be the prosecutor, who originally was going to be a man. But the more I thought about it, it's like, that's not really helping me any, because what's the man going to do outside of the courtroom? Mm-hmm. Not a whole lot, especially not in interacting with Ken. But if I made it a woman, and once that decision was made, that's the direction I chose to go into. And to just kind of spice it up a little bit, I made her an import. I chose her to be someone new to the area. I chose Long Beach, California as her hometown because I spent some time out there back in the 1980s. So
you were able to describe it a little bit more.
Well, not really. None of this story takes place in California, but she brings that with her. She's a Los Angeles Lakers fan. She likes Hollywood. Several times throughout the story, Brietta is the character's name. Several times she will just talk in conversation. She'll quote something from a movie. There's a scene where they're in the DA's office, and the DA, her boss, is angry because one of Ken's fellow officers tried to intimidate Brietta, and he broke some procedural rules in doing so. And she asked the chief, is this the man who intimidated one of my staff attorneys? And after they answer all her questions, she takes them into another room, and so Ken and Brietta are just sitting there, and Brietta goes, "Is this the man who wrecked the buffet at the Herald Club this morning?" From Beverly Hills Cop. So just little things like that help color her character, her personality.
So it took you 2 years to write this book, as you were telling me earlier. How were you able to balance your life, being an author, thinking of ideas to write this book, and having a full-time job here at WXVT?
Well, actually, it's closer to off and on. Of course, there were times where I took breaks, but all told, it was about 5 years. Okay. But how I do it is basically, first of all, this mind is always spinning. There's always something floating around in there. And just whenever I sit down and have a moment, and so my evenings, a lot of my evenings, sometimes on weekends, and I do it in spurts. I may go nose to the grindstone for several days in a row, and then I may break for a week. Just keep working at it. Just keep working at it a little bit at a time until I have something. The first draft took almost a year, and then there was some self-editing, some redrafts, and along the way you come up with ideas of how to make this better, how to make this character more interesting. And also I attended some workshops that gave me other ideas. So actually I probably could have condensed the time more, but because I went to these workshops, I came back, oh, wow, that'll work in my story. So I kept making changes, and this started out, the original title was Red Creek, which is the name of the town where Ken works, and it is so vastly different from what I wrote in 2007. The content of the story itself, the flow of it. And then after going through all of that, several drafts, I sent it off to an editor, a woman in Cleveland, actually. She has a connection to Delta State University, and she sent it back with the grammatical and the technical issues that an editor is supposed to find, but also a number of suggestions regarding the content. There was a critique that was very well done. Now, of course, as a writer, you don't want to hear that. You know, this didn't work for you, you didn't like it? No, and so there's a little bit of protectiveness that goes on, but also I understand she did it for a reason. She wanted me to make the book better. And so what happened was I did the grammatical corrections in a couple of months, and then I just shut the whole thing down, worked on something else for a while, and then maybe 4 or 5 months later, I looked at her letter again and says, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So I restructured the story, and I spent basically almost 2 years moving things around, taking some things out that, even though I liked them, I thought that they were entertaining, I just couldn't make them work logistically in this story. So they're sitting in a separate file somewhere. Maybe I'll use them some point in the future, maybe I won't. So this turned into a lean, mean fighting machine, so to speak. I think it flows a lot better now than it did. And toward the end of the year, that's when I started looking at publication options. Actually, that's always on the agenda, always checking to see if there are agents who might be looking for a new writer.
So this is your first published book.
Yes.
Now I have to ask you, Do you have any regrets? Would you have done anything differently with the story or with anything with the published book?
No regrets. Maybe start it sooner. Maybe come up with a plausible idea, because I've been trying to write actually since I left high school. I spent the first 10 years just floundering, not really able to come up with a coherent idea, a story with a beginning and end and a middle that makes sense, that fit together. Then about 15, 16 years ago, I did come up with an idea that turned into a big mess. It's I wanted to do something to set up a serial, sort of a science fiction fantasy serial, but I needed a starting point, and this was going to develop my main character. Well, supporting character in that story took over the project and just made a mess of it. It was somebody who was supposed to die. When I came up with this idea, my lead character was going to be where he's going because his wife, the love of his life, had died in an automobile accident. So with nothing else to keep him in the present day, he decides to join this project. That's what I wanted to do. But I wrote a scene with her, and you know how when you're visiting somebody and they're not paying any attention to you, your mind wanders, you start doing things. And so she amused herself she turned on the stereo and started lip syncing to a song, and they caught her. It was an embarrassing moment, but it was also a very funny moment. And when I did that, it's like, I can't kill her now.
As the audience grew to love her, or the reader grew to love her.
Well, no, they didn't love her. They hated her because
she
was a mess. But the point is, I loved her.
So you couldn't kill her. You felt some sort of attachment.
Yeah, and so that really destroyed that story because I ended up with maybe 5 or 6 subplots. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally, I just said, you know what? Put it on the shelf, rethink it, come back to it when you have a better idea of how to, maybe you either need to break it down, simplify it, or separate it from this serial that you want to do and do something else with it. And I haven't looked at it at all in probably 10 years.
Wow. So you've always wanted to be an author. That was always on your mind.
Yeah.
Yes. And so are there any more books on the horizon for you?
Well, actually, this is the first of, I don't want to call it a series, but sort of a franchise. And so I actually have 2. One is sort of a sequel to this one. It involves the same principal characters here after the events of this story, picking up in their lives later. But the next one that I want to get out actually is an unrelated project. It's something else that I wrote about 8 years ago that I want to work on and get it out toward the end of this year. But the next one related to this is going to be called Innocent Souls. And it's about domestic violence. And it, like everything else using this particular setting, is going to be based on true events, true crimes. In my job, my day job, your job, one of the things that we do seemingly more than anything else is crime stories. And there have been a few memorable cases that have come across, either I've reported on or some of my coworkers have, that stick in the mind. And one happened a few years ago that was really touching to me because it started out as a missing person report, and I met the family, and we had a good conversation. And you know, reporters are supposed to be objective and not really get emotionally involved, but I did feel close to the victim because of that interview that I had with her son. And later we found out that she had been murdered, and her most recent boyfriend was the suspect. And there were a number of things that happened along the way that made me feel very close to this, because there was a search that went on for about a week, and I did several follow-up stories and actually stumbled upon part of the crime scene without realizing it. And I thought, well, you know, maybe my character, there's a character in this book named Angela. She's a television news reporter. So she's going to be the lead in Innocent Souls, and she's going to basically do what I did, but in more theatrical fashion.
So most of your stories are, or most of your books are going to be based out of the Delta region.
Yes.
And why should people go pick up Delta Blue?
For the entertainment, the love story. I think there are people who are interested in the interracial relationships, maybe not for themselves, but they want to know what people are going through and what they have to deal with. Or maybe they're curious, what attracts you to this person? But also you get to see some of the things that go on inside a courtroom. Most of your television series kind of gloss over it. Everything is really super, super fast, but some of these things take months or even years to get to trial. And trials, just one witness can take half a day. Whereas when you watch it on television, they're on and off the screen in about a minute and a half. And
these stories aren't even, it's not just a story, it's not just a plot and people in the story and you find out an ending. I feel like it's a lesson, it's a life lesson that you're teaching, and there's a goal that you're trying to accomplish with the reader, that when they finish the book, they actually, I guess, a subliminal message,
yes,
if you so wish.
In this case, certainly, because one of the things that, as in the early part of this project, once I got my character list together and once I decided that Ken and Brietta would get together and that would be the heart of the story, a number of things happened in a very short span of time that influenced me. One of them was there was a story about Prom Night in Mississippi, which is the documentary backed by actor Morgan Freeman. There's a town in the east edge of the Delta called Charleston, where he's from, that everybody knows everybody. They all go to the same school, but they have separate proms, or they have had separate proms, and he thought that that was ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous that we have separate things. Sometimes people come to Greenville for the first time. Why are there two VFWs? Why are there two American Legions? And the simple answer is there's one for black people, one for white people. Shortly after I read that article, we had the Martin Luther King Jr. Day holiday, and everybody has a program honoring Dr. King, it seems, churches, schools, civic clubs, and it's all wonderful, and we all do a marvelous job of recognizing King and his work. Then the next day was the first inauguration of President Obama, and that happened while I was covering another MLK event at Mississippi Valley State University. And the euphoria of that audience, and it was a mixed audience of when he took the oath of office, was electric. I actually felt chills watching the people watch him. And a few minutes after that, the public relations person at Valley, we had a conversation because we were friends. We had a very good rapport, and she told me that she had dated one of my high school classmates once. And we had a reunion coming up that year. And she says, when you see him, would you tell him I said hello? And I said, I don't think that's going to happen. And the look on her face, I mean, it's like all the air just got sucked out of the room. We were in a cafeteria. There were maybe 50, 60 other people getting in line to eat. And we were just standing off to the side, and it was like nobody else was there all of a sudden. We were in this vacuum when she said, when I saw that her expression change, and she says, "Don't tell me you all have segregated reunions." What could I say? We do. And that really made me angry. And so I put some of that energy into Ken's point of view in his frustration. He wants to do what's right. He just wants to get through life without making a whole lot of waves. But it's aggravating to him that people are like that, that they want to separate. And after so many years of people working together to get minorities the right to vote, to improve education, to make education, quality education, accessible to everyone, to see us throw it all away. We accept lower standards. I'm probably going to catch all kinds of flack for saying this to you, but it's like a cultural dumbing down. People come up and say to you, why are you listening to white folks' music? It's music, it's good music, okay? Or if, just listen to me speaking to you. You can understand me, right? And somebody comes up and says, listen to him talking proper. I was taught to talk this way, okay? I went to school. You went to the same school. One of us got the message, apparently. And there's another one, and I've heard this from people in some of the schools in the Delta over the last several years, is that some of the children in the public schools don't do well, not because they're not smart or because they're lazy, but because of peer pressure. Peer pressure that says, if you get your lesson, you study, and you get good grades, you're trying to act white. I hate that. I hate that. So yeah, some of that went into this because I hope that, I'm not really giving away anything when I tell you the ending is positive. It's the ride. It's what you go through getting there. One person got a copy of it last week, and he's already done, and he said that he enjoyed reading and seeing if he could figure out what locations I was talking about because of some of the descriptions of the scenery. Because the names are different, but the locations are the same. You go into this store, you go into Westport, Red Creek, you're going to recognize some of the things that are in this book. In fact, the artist who did this cover, I actually sent him a photograph of our bridge, which he uses right here as part of the background. Now the other images he acquired from other sources, but I wanted that bridge in there because it's a recognizable symbol in the Delta.
Of course. So Delta Blue is available for purchase as of, when was it fresh on the market?
February 6th was the actual publication date, and it's right now today as we speak. It's sold exclusively through CreateSpace.com, just www.createspace.com/413-5057, and that will take you straight to my page. It will also be available on Amazon and Kindle, and I'm working with some people locally to try to get a launch party, so we'll actually have some copies in hand that we can sign, or I'll sign.
We could sign. Well, thank you so much, Woodrow, for coming on the show and just, talking to me a little bit about your book and the messages behind it, because it's more than just, I guess, what the eye sees on the cover. I guess they always say, don't judge a book by its cover, but for this one, there's multiple meanings to this book, and there's really a life lesson inside of it once you get to the end.
Well, I'm going to pay out the nose for the art here, but you have the river, you have the crime scene, you have that to indicate justice. The lipstick lets you know there's a woman involved, and he's there because of music, because I think Delta's music is also very important. And Ken and his buddies, they hang out at a place where there's live music, and actually somebody very well known in the Delta in Greenville makes a few cameo appearances in here, but I'm not giving that away.
You're going to have to pick up the book to find out who. Well, thank you so much, and you could get his book on Amazon, probably the easiest way, and createspace.com, and we'll see you at the book signing.
All right. Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you.